Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dominique Derel. I'm the director of the IMF's Institute for Capacity Development. And it's really my great pleasure to welcome you to this high-level capacity development talk on tackling global risk, building capacity to manage public debt. This talk is part of a series of events highlighting our cooperation with our member countries and our development partners to build stronger institutions in several areas. Debt management, public investment, central banking, macro analytical tools and the like. At the IMF, we see these efforts to help our member countries strengthen their economic and financial institutions as a vital complement to policy advice and where it's needed, financial support. You may already have attended our first two capacity development talks today on supporting climate resilience through the Climate Public Investment Management Assessment and the cutting-edge tools on central banking. And Monday, we also provided a peek into training on our public debt dynamic tools. And you can learn more about our capacity development and all of these activities. Our booth over there on the capacity development experience in the back of the atrium. And we also invite you to join our reception that will start immediately after this event. But to come back to this present event, at the moment when debt issues are pressing, I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to discuss how building capacity, building institutions can help reduce debt vulnerabilities, enhance resilience, and minimize the risk of debt crisis. And we have an absolute terrific panel to address this topic. So going from your right to your left, we have Romuald Wagdani, who is the Minister of Economy and Finance of Benin. And he has been a minister since 2016, which is quite a bit of longevity for a finance minister in this world of ours. Minister Wagdani is also the president of the board of governors of the ECOWAS Investment and Development Bank. Previously, he held a senior position at Deloitte. Minister Wagdani has spearheaded profound transformation in his ministry, including prominently regarding domestic revenue mobilizations and debt management. And Benin is a member of the IMF's Regional Technical Assistance Center for West Africa. Next to him, we have Lasha Kutsishvili, who is the Minister of Finance of Georgia since 2021. Minister Kutsishvili has had a long and distinguished career in the Ministry of Finance, having been previously the Deputy Minister of Finance and the Director General of the Revenue Service. He also previously worked as a tax and legal expert at Ernst & Young. Minister Kutsishvili has led a critical capacity development project, including regarding the development of a local currency government bond market and the development and implementation of his country's debt management strategy. And Georgia is a member of the IMF's Caucasus, Central Asia, and Mongolia Regional Development Centers. And closest to me, I have Geeta Gopinaj, who is the IMF's first Deputy Managing Director. Geeta has an amazing and impressive list of responsibilities that I will not go over, otherwise we will spend the whole seminar on it, but partly important for this activity today. She oversees the IMF surveillance and capacity development activity. She was previously the IMF's chief economist, and before that, a renowned professor at Harvard University Economics Department. So many thanks to our three panelists for being with us this afternoon. Just before starting, just a few more words. First, to really acknowledge and really deeply thank our global network of partners for their crucial support to capacity development. Without them, we would not be able to meet the rising demand from recipient countries, half of which are low-income countries. And let me welcome, in addition to all of you, all of us that are watching us online, and recognize our expanding community of more than 160,000 online learners that use our curriculum of over 50 courses in 6 different languages. Let me then just move on to this event and kick it off. And Geeta, if I can turn to you first to help set the scene from all of us. We are in current circumstances where a rising number of countries are facing a challenging debt landscape, putting pressure on public finances and in some cases leading to a need for debt restructuring. How to deal with these policy issues is a subject of many, many discussions this week. But also together with our colleagues at the World Bank, the IMF is actively engaged in providing capacity development support to countries to help strengthen debt management, improve debt transparency, and reduce the risk of facing a debt crisis. How do you see the risk facing the global economy now, partly on the debt side? What is the IMF doing? And concretely, how do you see IMF capacity development help in this regard?
Thank you, Dominique, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. The debt landscape is tough at this point. I mean, quite simply, we've had a period where debt levels have gone up quite considerably in many parts of the world. And following the pandemic and the war, the pressures on finances for many countries are very high. We have about 15% of our low-income countries that are already in debt distress, requiring debt restructuring. And we have another 45% of low-income countries that are in high risk of debt distress. And then we have about 25% of emerging markets that are borrowing at very, very high interest rates. And some of them are also in default. So we certainly have a landscape where there are many countries with deep debt problems, and in an environment where global interest rates have gone up. As central banks around the world have raised interest rates to bring down inflation, the environment is one where interest rates for all kinds of borrowing have gone up, which just makes it that much harder when you have high levels of debt. Now the question is, what do we as the IMF do to help countries in this situation, and especially in the capacity development front? Before I get to the capacity development work that we do, just very quickly, we deal with our countries who have high levels of debt, who then need IMF programs, and we are there working with them to come up with programs that can help bring back macro stability and return the economies back to market access. Now, we need debt to be sustainable. That requires debt to be restructured, to be at the sustainable level. And that has not been an easy task because the group of creditors that we have now in this current time is very different from what it was, say, in the 1980s. It's a much more diverse group of creditors. So a lot of effort that we've been doing at the IMF is on how to get to faster debt resolution. The G20 Common Framework, very helpful in this regard, and we just came out of a meeting on the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable to, again, help make progress. And this is a roundtable that was jointly launched by the IMF, the World Bank, and India's G20 presidency. Now, to the topic of today, which is on capacity development work. Ideally, we would like to prevent countries from finding themselves in debt distress. That requires good policies and strong institutions. And that's precisely where IMF's work on capacity development is absolutely critical. This work covers multiple fronts. You can't talk about good financial management unless you have a good sense of exactly how much of debt countries have. So there's a lot of work that we do in terms of raising capacity development for enhancing debt transparency, how countries can monitor better the amount of debt they're taking on, but also to recognize the kind of contingent liabilities that they may have, which is it's not on paper right now, but if things go wrong in the economy, then you've had some guarantees, that implicit guarantees that exist that then trigger, that turns that into debt for countries. So we need debt transparency, and that's absolutely critical. You also need to be able to figure out how sustainable the level of debt is in your country, and we've been helping countries work with those tools to try and determine how risky their finances are and what exactly do they need to do to reduce that level of risk. Similarly, for several countries, the goal is to develop domestic debt markets that then gives them more flexibility in terms of where they're borrowing from, as opposed to relying entirely on foreign borrowing. you use the domestic debt market to tap financing, and that can be helpful, especially in crisis times. So that's another example of how we work. And I was just going to end with one last point, which is this work is very critical, not just because of the capacity development and the training that provides, but it is very critical for us to do our surveillance work and our lending work well. When we have programs and we have, the part of the program involves bringing debt levels down, it's essential that countries have the capacity to be able to get that done. So we just get much more traction for our policies, for our programs, when the countries have the right policies and institutions. And that's why capacity development plays a very important role. And I know I said this was the last thing, but the absolute last thing is that none of this would be possible without all the partners that we work with the country authorities, with our donors who are absolutely critical to make this successful, with our long-term experts. It's a total joint effort that makes this work.
Thanks a lot, Gita, for setting the stage. So, as I was saying in the introduction, both Benin and Georgia have made very important strides in recent years to improve the debt management, to enhance debt transparency, and more generally, more broadly, to manage their own public finance, some of it with support from the IMF. So I think we're now going to turn to the two ministers to say, ministers, what were the key reforms that allow you to make decisive progress? What would be your advice to other countries seeking to strengthen, their debt management, their debt transparency, their approach to these broad issues? Maybe we can start with you, Minister Kuchishvili, and then we'll turn to Mr. Wenali.
Thank you very much. So first of all, it's my pleasure to have the chance to participate in this discussion on a very important topic, debt management. So I can share the Georgia's experience, which counts for last 30 years period when the country have the huge need of the reform, fiscal reform and the structural reform both. And in this process, always that prudent macro policy was always the top priority of the country. So in this process, country had a huge need of the infrastructural investment. It covers all the direction. It covers the new roads, new highways, new schools, new transmission lines. So for that, of course, it was needed the financing. And the main source of the financing for Georgia always was, the external source always was the international financial institutions. IFI's funding and resources was always very important, not only for the reason that the scale of the funding was big, but also importantly for the reason that with the funding the country was benefiting too much expertise and knowledge, and also during this process we received so many technical assistance from the Monetary Fund and from the World Bank and from other partners as well. So in this process, prudent macro policy was always key in case of the Georgia, and with the help of the International Monetary Fund, we managed to introduce several tools which actually helped the country. This was fiscal transparency, new code. This was public management investment assessment system, which was very important that government will make sure that all the public investment is made by the government is effective. And besides that, of course, we introduced the fiscal rules, which, by the way, is quite strict. Actually, with our fiscal rules, budget deficit should be below 3% all the time, and debt to GDP ratio should be below 60%. And in line with the other tools of the fiscal rules, while the increasing of the taxes with our fiscal rules needs a referendum in the country. So with this kind of the limitation, so it's quite challenging, especially during the COVID period, when there was a need of the high capital expenditure in the country, and all the time last 5-6 years period. So the capital expenditure of the country all the time was from 7 to 8% of our GDP, and this always was one of the growth driver for the country. With these tools, and also we introduced a country debt strategy, which also highlighted not only the level of the debt, which is the safe level of the debt for the country, but also the decomposition of the level, decomposition of the debt. So how much should be in foreign currency and how much should be in local currency. So this also was quite challenging for Georgia. As I mentioned, most of the financing external source was from the IFIs, and that's why almost 80% of our debt is denominated in foreign currency. So these are all the aspects that our debt strategy, for debt strategy, it was important. And all these tools, including the quite strong fiscal consolidation measures which we have during these recent years, we can say that we have a quite good results. Within all these measures, so budget deficit, which was during the COVID period at 9.3%, decreased to below threshold 2.8%, and also debt level to GDP, which was above 60%, declined below 40%, more than 20 percentage point. So actually these are and I can say that the fiscal consolidation measures continue still, because so the country have the huge need to invest in the infrastructure. I mean that road infrastructure, highways, which will be finalized mostly next year in Georgia, which is East-West Highway, North-South corridor. So you can imagine that in these days, in recent circumstances, the importance of the transit capacity for the country, as we called it, for the middle corridor, is even more important than it was ever. So during this process, so all the buffers which country gained, and all the capacity which we have additional fiscal space, so it will be used for the next period for the steel infrastructural projects, which is on our top priority in our infrastructural agenda, which is energy security and energy independence. Projects like Black Sea underwater electricity cable, also green hydro electricity generation infrastructure, and of course for the improving the transit capacity of the country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wedden.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this discussion. So I believe I will be sharing our experience, not giving, advices or techniques to debt management. What I will be saying here will not be applied to debt from multilateral international institutions such as World Bank and African Development Bank. So I will be talking about other type of financing. When it comes to Benin, for the last 7.5 years, our principles are the three following simple statements. First, make sure you, how to say it? I want to be very simple and concrete. Make sure that you have reform that help you to gain credibility on the market. You have to gain credibility and the trust from the market. So I will come to detail. So how do you get into that credibility and what you have to do to get to that point? The second thing is, don't take all the money you have on the table. It's not because you have money on the table that you have to take it. That's also the second key principle. And the third one is to be innovative. Coming back to the first principle, building the credibility of credibility and earning the trust of partners and financial markets, it starts with transparency in your fiscal policies. Make sure you have permanent and transparent communication with the market. It's not more about the quality of your results, it's about the quality of communication and the transparency the quality and the predictability of your fiscal policies. Market will not be happy because you have the highest growth rate or the lowest budget deficit, but they will be very comfortable if they can predict what will be happening in your country. So, in order to reach that, then you have, that's what we did, a set of reform. One is all the reform around domestic revenue mobilization. If you don't have domestic revenue capacity, you cannot go to the market and have access to funding. When you have a clear domestic revenue mobilization strategy and you communicate that strategy to the market, they are comfortable about what you're doing, they can predict what will happen, they can predict your capacity to reimburse the debt, and they are very comfortable. So reform to improve and to bring predictability on your domestic revenue mobilization strategies. The second thing is about spending. That's key. When people give you money, they want to make sure that you have transparency in public procurement. They want to make sure that you deliver on your promises and you do what you plan to do with the money. So in order to do that, in the case of Benin, we have done a couple of things. One of the principles we use is, since 2016, since I became Minister of Finance, one of the simple rules is for 100% spending, I want to make sure that more than half of the spending is dedicated to investment. Investment that are creating opportunities to our people, that are bringing infrastructure to our people, etc. The size of Benin's government at that time in 2016 was around about 55 ministers with large ministerial cabinet, etc. We reduced the size of the government to less than 20 ministers. We reduced the size of the cabinet, and we make sure that when you take our domestic revenue, we spend less than half of domestic revenue to cover, general public spending. That's very difficult because that means you have stringent control over government general spending. You reduce all the spending, you make sure that you dedicate your money through public investment, creating ground for growth. So that means you have transparency in your spending, you have prioritization on your spendings. That's the second thing. The third one is make sure that you respect your commitment. Make sure that you have a good treasury management and you pay your debt on time. Do whatever it takes to pay on time and don't go to your financier and say, can I reschedule, can I do this. So when you work, you have like a transparent and predictable fiscal policies. You work on your domestic revenue mobilization, prioritization on spendings, and you respect your commitment. Then you create the ground to earn the trust from the market. That's the first thing. So I said I have three principles. The first one is to do all it takes, all the reform to earn the trust from the market. Now that you get the trust of the market, you improve your sovereign credit ratings. Then you have many proposals. That was the case in Benin. Year 4 of in Benin as Minister of Finance, I started getting a lot of proposals from many, people coming. We want to build that road. We had that very interesting financing for you. You never take a financing because it's on the table, it's available. No. Stick on your plan. Mm-hmm. You have planification investment. Stick on your plan and don't take the money because it's on the table. And also be careful when you have easy money coming in, but with 100 pages of documentation. Because within the documentation, you'll read like cross-default clauses, mm-hmm. very sophisticated undisclosed commitment, etc., etc. So don't take the money because it's on the table, and be careful when it's so easy to catch the money. And then the third principle I want to mention is to be very innovative. Look at the market condition and look at the market trend and try to adapt your strategy to the market and take advantage of what's new in the market. Opportunities are there. Even now, the rate are increasing and market competition are difficult these last months. but I'm talking about general principles. So in normal market, we'll try to think about new innovative structure. That are simple structure, but innovative. One example is anything that has to do with climate change, so green bond, SDG bond, etc. Benin, as of today, is the only country in Africa that's managed to have SDG bond. We issued our SDG bond in 2020. That means, we took all the SDGs, and then we have our investment strategy to meet all the SDGs. We price the investment, we go to the market with a framework and say, okay, we need X million of dollars in order to do this type of investment. But if we succeed raising that money, here is how many people that will see change in their life. How many people will have access to clean water? How many people will have better education, etc., etc. So using, innovative approach and the market trend to raise money. So that's what I can share. So gain trust, but that needs a lot of reform and being very transparent on what you're doing. And second thing, as I mentioned, is don't take all the money you have on the table, don't grab everything. And the third one, be innovative. I hope that this helps.
Thanks a lot, both Lasha and Romuald, for sharing this very rich experience. We are going to open the floor shortly to question and answers. You'll see a couple of microphones in the room. Just before, I'll turn back to our panelists, just in case they want to react very quickly to what one of their colleagues had said on the stage. I don't know if Gita, Lasha, you want to say anything about what you've heard?
Everything sounded wonderful. I think the idea that it's important to have transparency, to have, what we would call a medium-term fiscal plan, which is basically what gives people the visibility of where you are headed, developing domestic markets. This is exactly what we would hope many more countries do. And if I were to ask a question, I would ask you, but why doesn't this happen in other countries at the same scale? And if there's some secret sauce that you have, but that would be it.
Can I go? Dominic mentioned that I've been Minister of Finance for over 7 years. And I think because I've been in charge for a long period of time, allow me to have consistency in my, strategy. If you start a strategy and then there's a change, a new person, a new team arrive, then things may change and then, things may be different. So one thing is to have the strategy, but also you need time to implement that strategy. You need consistency of the strategy. And, Benin is, I think, so far having success because we have that.
Great. Lasha, do you want to react?
Yeah, just generally the finance minister's life cycle is much more lower than the successful story we have.
Yes.
So that's very, very important, that because we are performing the strategy, so every other minister should follow the strategy, and that's the advantage of the strategy, and not like as a single initiative for someone. So that's I fully agree with my colleague that it's very important. So in Georgia's case, that I can share that it's a commitment, very strong commitment to macro stability, which actually the countries, developing countries like Georgia, where the most growth driver are the private sector, and it was always the private sector. So this is very important. For the, I will not go in details, but for the public investment, it should be defined where is the governments are investing. So it should be invested with the very strict rules, and with the evaluations, what effect they are waiting and to see what they received after the investment. So public investment assessment is very important in this process. Diversification is also very important, and it will be done by the improving by the developing the local market, because we always have to have some different so-called the proportion of the local and the domestic portion in our debt. In case of the Georgia last year, it was up to 8%, but so this year we managed to decrease up to 70%. As I mentioned, our debt strategy says that it should be close to, in the middle period, should be close to 65%, and it is achieved with developing local market, more borrowing on the local market, and also the local market to be developed. It should be quite stable situation in it. Also, the scrutinizing more on the new borrowing is very important, and all the tools. Otherwise, so the countries, especially the development countries, is a huge need of additional spending, and especially in the infrastructure. That's why my advice will be to go to the more consolidation and to find more ways to finance that most important projects which actually benefits all the population of the countries.
Thank you. So let's open the floor to questions. Yeah, please do go to the mic. I see first at the mic Luc Bagot, who is our great partner with the European Commission. So I'm very happy that he opens the Q&A session.
Okay,
thank you.
So thank you very much to give the opportunity to the Commission, the European Commission, to speak and comment from the floor. Debt burdens had already been rising before COVID-19 shock, and since then a handful of countries have been defaulted on their debt, and many other countries, while not technically in default, are struggling with increasing debt service burdens in a context of rising interest rates. And the European Union fully supports the different multilateral initiatives that have been launched, such as the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative and the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment. And for countries with unsustainable debt, there is a need to improve the multilateral system for dealing with sovereign debt restructuring. And for the G20 Common Framework, this includes clear timelines, debt service payment suspension at the start of the negotiations, and extension of the Common Framework for mix. The European Union welcomes the establishment by the World Bank and the IMF of a sovereign debt round table to gather key creditors to reach common understanding and improve coordination between creditors in the sovereign debt restructuring process. For middle-income countries that are not yet eligible to the Common Framework, concrete solutions must be found reflecting interests of creditors and debtors in a balanced way. And effective participation of non-Paris Club creditors seems to be the key for a successful restructuring process. Of course, developing capacities on public debt management also plays a key role in mitigating debt vulnerabilities, and the European Commission supports debt transparency and debt management capacity through a number of initiatives launched by the World Bank, the OECD, the UNCTAD. And finally, we consider that efforts to tackle debt vulnerabilities must be part of a broader development agenda, including sound macro-financial fiscal policies, improving public finance management, and fighting illicit financial flows. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and again, I'm very happy to recognize the strong cooperation we have with the European Union. Maybe we can take a few more questions, and then we'll go back to the panel. Yes, please. And if you could introduce yourself, thank you.
Thank you. Dilru Sharipov, Harvard Kennedy School. I would like to ask a question to Mrs. Gopinath. Ms. Gopinath, in light of growing concerns over debt sustainability in low-income countries, how is the IMF refining its policy advice and lending instruments to solve these problems and to evolving needs of its member countries? And what are the new initiatives which are being considered to provide tailored support for sustainable debt management? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. And then we'll go back to the panel.
Dr. Trapez. Dr. Fabrizi, Professor of Accounting and Governance at Brock University in Canada. My question is for Dr. Gopinath. Is debt as such an evil? My related question is from a capacity building perspective. What does it take to fix the average citizen perspective, especially in low-income country, that debt is a mechanism for appropriating wealth?
Could you repeat your first question?
Is debt an evil,
An evil?
Debt an evil. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's an interesting philosophical question. I'll turn back to the panel, and maybe I'll just add one question of my own, because I think was really interested in both what Romuald and Lasha said. That I think you said obviously different circumstances, different countries, but you both had a clear vision of where you wanted to go. You put in place a number of instruments, a number of tools, a number of frameworks to think through to have your medium-term directions, and then you stuck to it. You said, Romuald, you said, don't take all of the money that is on the table. That may be a philosophy for life. We can think about that in general. But I think it was interesting, but also maybe I wonder whether it's sort of a bit daunting for people to realize, and from your colleagues, policymakers, there are many, many different things that you need to act upon, right? Medium term, the fiscal framework, a sound debt management unit, a sound public investment unit. Do you have a sense maybe also, if you are many of these things to build, is there an order? Do you see a sequence? Do you think that it should all be done together? Maybe I'll add that question to the list. Maybe we can go back in reverse order, starting with Romuald and go back to Gita.
I don't think that there is a preferred order for these type of things. Anything that has to do with public management impacts your debt strategy, because people look at all that's happening, even in the political governance, to healthcare systems. So everything is tied together, and the quality of your global governance and your public policies and fiscal policies all contribute to your capacity to have access to what I call good debt. So there's no such order. It's like being do what you can do to gain that trust from the market. But I think if you use human capital as the cornerstone of all you're doing, all your decision is, how do I make sure that every single penny that I'm spending on behalf of my country is well spent, is going through changing the day-to-day life of my people, etc. If you have those simple things, you're making sure that you are transparent, then you contribute to that things. So there is no order. It's a global action. And I want to say something on that question. He said if debt is evil, right?
Yeah.
I would like to use personal situation. Let's say you go to your bank and you use your bank overdraft to buy a house. Then you get into big trouble, right? Then you can see that debt as something very bad. But you go to your bank and you get access to funding, and you create a business. You create value. And you start paying taxes. So it's a good thing. So the answer is it depends. It depends what type of debt and what you're doing with the debt. Even the level of debt is not the issue. I always say that, debt to GDP, I don't look at the debt to GDP ratio. I don't care about that. I care about cash. Am I able to pay back my debt? I look at interest over revenue. How much interest I'm paying over the revenue, domestic revenue I'm collecting. That's more important for me than GDP to debt to GDP. You do a GDP rebasing and you change everything. That figures. But cash is cash. So that's what I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Asha?
So as I said, the experiences were different country by country, but still the goal is the same, to keep the stability in the country. So in terms of the Georgia, as I mentioned, so all components are very important. So these components and these strategies are so interconnected that you cannot leave one of them and so concentrate on only one. So, and this is not only the one of the process. So these are the process that you once you will achieve your goals, you should maintain it, of course. And so you have to monitor and you have to observe it all the time and at all the stage of the economic cycle. So that's why, according to our strategy, we have so all the tools we use in terms of the transparency, in terms of the debt level, in terms of the diversification, in terms of the public finance, the investment assessment system. So all the tools are, I can say that at the end of the day, equally important. So if any of them will fail, so the whole situation will be quite difficult in the country.
Thank you. Dita, the final word?
Yeah. So to the question about is debt evil, I would like Rose's answer, which is that it depends. It's always a great answer. You know, the bottom line is it serves a purpose. There are, you know, you can be at a stage where you have to make very important investments in, say, physical infrastructure, in your education. And that's exactly what's then going to generate growth and what's going to make your incomes rise. How do you make that happen when you're not producing the income right now? How do you get from point A to point B? So therefore, if you're able to raise finances, that means some debt, to make that investment happen, that puts you in a much better place as a country. Now, like most things in life, sometimes too much of a good thing can also be bad. And so it is important to be very vigilant about how much debt is being taken on. And that's what all of these discussions that we had in terms of being absolute clarity on how much of debt do you have, how much of implicit debt do you have, what is the composition of debt, foreign currency, local currency, what are the risks of interest rates on that debt spiking very quickly, the environment that you're in. I mean, all of that matters for making sure you have the right appropriate level of debt. In terms of what we do, just very quickly, the IMF works very closely with the World Bank on helping countries that are in difficult debt situations, but more generally for helping them deal with debt issues. So let me just take concretely, if there's a country, for instance, that is in debt distress, I mean, one of the first things that the IMF does as a part of a program is to determine, you know, what will it take to bring the country back to more sustainable debt levels, right? So you kind of have a measurement of exactly how much of debt needs to be restructured and on what terms. So that's work that everybody looks to the IMF because and the World Bank, because we are the institutions that provide that information for the creditors to work with. Then, of course, there's a second step, which is how we help with getting the process moving in terms of getting the resolution that's needed for countries so that we can help them and we can provide our own financing. And there we've been doing a lot of work because, as I said, this is a very complicated creditor landscape. We need the common framework to do much better than what it's done. It has helped. Without a doubt, there's some progress being made, but it is taking too long. I think everybody agrees that we need much faster debt resolution. And so we're working towards that too. And the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable that I mentioned previously is an endeavor in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we are reaching the end of this event. Just before bringing it to a close, let me remind everyone that after this event, we'll have a reception towards the back of the room to celebrate with our partners, our countries, our community of alumni, the IMF's CD capacity development efforts. Also, would like to remind you that we invite you to join us for 2 remaining CD talks. One on strengthening education and health spending policies in low-income countries, and the others in tailoring macro-analytical tools to small island states. These 2 events will take place tomorrow morning at 10 and 10:30 in Cedar Hall, which is in the back. just to conclude, let me thank really dearly our panelists, Romeo, Lasha, and Gita, for a very engaging conversation, and I think we owe them a round of applause. Thank you very much.